Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome again for the second night in a row. But once again, my name's Amari, if you don't know, and I'm Community Life Coordinator. And today we have a wonderful man who I would first like to thank our resident Miss Rosemary Kitchen for allowing him to come and visit us and to share his wonderful speech he has today. So without further ado, let's make sure all our electronics are off. And I do know we might have some visitors here. If you do need to use the bathroom, it is down the hallway behind the receptionist desk. All right. And without further ado, here is Mr. Doug Dickerson.
Thank you, Amari. Okay. Hey. Well, I appreciate y'all coming out. I'm looking to see how many of my former professors are in the audience, how many of our clients are in the audience, how many of the Ollie students are here. I just want to thank you all for being, you could be watching Family Feud or MASH or whatever, but instead you wanted to be here to see Senator Tillis. No, just kidding. But instead we're going to talk about a very, very serious issue. Now, the good people here at the Forest said, hey, we'll pay you to come speak. And I said, yeah, that's too complicated. I would prefer whatever it is you were going to pay go towards a certain charity. So I am a retired Air Force. I know some of you are retired military. And when I was in the military, I'll tell you, I had about a year that I was in Afghanistan back in 2008, 2009. And the doc told me that there's about 70-something people that was in my unit. Our job was to train the Afghan police. And so therefore, we were out all over the country. And a lot of those people, were dealing with the stress of, am I going to get blown up today? So the doc told me that, hey, just so you know, about at least 1/4 of the people in your units are taking medication for this anxiety, et cetera. And since we didn't allow alcohol or anything else like that, there was always the issue about how do people, deal with stress and anxiety. Well, after all of that, when everybody got home, a number of people had quite a bit of trouble kind of reintegrating, getting over anxiety, getting over what they went through when they were in Afghanistan or Iraq or anywhere else. And what was different about these wars than many wars is most of these people didn't just go there for 6 months or a year. They went there for 6 months, for a year, came home for a year or 2 or 3, went back and forth 3 or 4 times. I went 5 times. And so a lot of people that went through a lot of stuff had issues dealing with how do I really kind of integrate into a civilian society. So the VA hasn't done the best job. They do a decent job, but they're not necessarily the best job. And so North Carolina tried something, mostly funded through private donations, but also with some state funding. And I just want to show you a short little video clip about this place near Camp Butner that is helping veterans get integrated or reintegrate. So if you'll just bear with me. And then when we're done with this, then we'll get into the main subject.
This is really getting to the root challenges that many of these service members have.
At the Veterans Life Center, we treat the whole veteran as a person.
It's changed my life. I feel great.
Now I get to see my son, to see his smile on his face.
It gave me my son back. It gave me my son back.
When you see another veteran hurting, why wouldn't you go out of your way to help them? Together, with your referrals, we can change hundreds of veterans' lives.
This is really getting to the root challenges that many of these service members have.
At the Veterans Life Center, we treat the whole veteran as a person.
It's changed my life. I feel great.
Now I get to see my son, to see his smile on his face.
It gave me my son back. It gave me my son back.
When you see another veteran hurting, why wouldn't you go out of your way to help them? Together, with your referrals, we can change hundreds of veterans' lives.
Well, I showed this video at a talk a few days ago, and it was 4 minutes long. So I guess they changed it on the website. Somebody must have told them, it's too long. It's shrunk in the rain. But anyhow, if it's a place, I know this is the time of year when people are doing qualified charitable distributions and other types of donations. If that's an organization you'd like to support, just see me afterwards and I will get you the info on what to do. Okay. So y'all appear to be pretty accomplished people. So I wanted to start with some big thoughts, okay? Big thoughts. And then we're going to get into a quick comparison of the US and China and look more in depth at what China is actually going through. So in international affairs, there's one guiding principle that you have to know. All nations act in their own self-interest all the time without exception. So even though we're in this thing called the NATO alliance and we have allies in Japan and Korea, we're always going to act in our own self-interest. Doesn't matter who's in the White House. That's a guiding principle. Secondly, is when you get into global security, it's a game between, right now, it's an infinite game, meaning it keeps going on and on and on, between democracies with liberal economies, Europe, US, Korea, China, Australia, Japan, Australia, versus these autocracies with state-directed economies. That infinite game is in constant competition to the point that at the end of the Cold War, this Stanford professor made this quote, and he essentially said, we've finally gotten to the point where one system has won out, and it looks like that's the system from here on. It is evident, first of all, in the total exhaustion of viable systematic alternatives to Western liberalism. Our way is the dominant way. Well, we've seen in the past decade that that way is in competition because it's an infinite game. All right. I'm going to test any of you. Well, I know that Ellen was in Japan. Some of you all may have been to China, Japan, those kind of places. When you read from right to left, right? So I'm going to make you look at a chart that's going to make you look from right to left. So first is we're going to look at the growth rate. So the green is China's growth rate since 2001. The blue is the US's growth rate. And what you're seeing here is the US's growth rate is really staying mostly under this 4%, usually between 2% to 4% growth rate. That's the band of the growth of our economy. China's growth rate has been on this steady decline. Okay. Occasional, surges, but for the most part, it's been in a downward slope. Now, if you take a look at what people are what are their incomes in China and in the United States, again, look right from left, from 2002 to projected out to 2029. China's has gone from almost no middle class to now having a middle class, but our Americans are significantly wealthier than what the Chinese are. And we're growing at a faster rate. Okay, now back to that GDP growth. This is our trend line. In the US, we've been growing at about a 2.1% growth. On the right side, you're looking at how do we get that growth? Well, about 2/3 of our growth comes from Americans' own consumption. And that's been fairly constant for the last many decades. And then our government spending, et cetera. China's growth doesn't come so much from their consumption. Their consumption is actually closer to 40%. So most of China's growth is coming from exports. They're an export-driven economy, not a consumption-driven economy. So if you're an export-driven economy, your ability to control that is more limited. The US, by being consumption-driven, is more, not only is it more controllable, it's more resilient. All right, I know it's an eye chart. You're looking at inflation all the way back to the time we had the global financial crisis, coming out of 2000 or 2010. And what the colors you're looking for are red, okay? So for the most part, most countries had inflation under control until the immediate post-COVID years. Okay, that's this, look at this 2021, 2022. And then in 2023, you see that most countries, they had gotten their arms around the inflation. Inflation was coming back down to normal. The outlier here, oh, by the way, some of you may have taught economics at one of the universities. Good, healthy growth kind of needs inflation, but moderate at around 1% to 3%. The outlier is right here. This is China. China didn't suffer from inflation. China actually is on the verge of deflation. So why does deflation matter? Well, why would you want to spend money on something if it would cost you less in the future, right? So therefore you don't buy, you don't shop, right? You're waiting for it to get cheaper. Inflation's the other way around. You buy it now while it's cheaper than in the future. So this is one reason China's consumption has been an issue, is because people are anticipating things to cost less. Get my clicker. Okay. Exports. So what you're looking at here is American imports, okay? Where are we getting our imports from? Well, from the time that China came into the World Trade Organization 20 years ago, y'all remember H. Ross Perot, the giant sucking sounds of jobs, et cetera? All right, so that was 1991. And throughout the 1990s, do you remember every year or two, Congress would have this big debate about whether the United States should extend most favored nation status, to China? And every time it would come down to the wire about whether or not Congress would approve it. Well, the US was able to use that as leverage on China to undertake certain kinds of reforms, not necessarily do things that are too aggressive to US companies. But we finally caved on that. And we caved and said, all right, we're okay with China joining the World Trade Organization. And once they're in the World Trade Organization, we don't have to give them most favored nation status anymore because they'll always have it. Well, that's when trade took off, okay? China really started growing from around the year 2000. And this is showing, if you look this chart, they went from about 8%, or our imports from China went from about 8% up to about 22%, over a roughly 15, 17-year period. And then you'll see the big steep decline. My pointer's not doing too good. Big steep decline in 2018. Any volunteers on what was magical about 2018? What was that guy's name? Trump tariffs. Trump tariffs went in 2018. Now, I'll tell you, I think he's an awful guy, but that's all I'm going to say. Robert Lighthizer, Bob Lighthizer was a trade lawyer in Washington for decades, used to work for President Reagan on the trade U.S. Trade representative. He had been taking cases from American companies for 30 years about how American companies were disadvantaged by trading practices with other countries. And of course, most egregious with China. In the first few years of the 2000s, I worked at the Pentagon. I was the desk officer for several European countries. And whenever an American company like Lockheed or Raytheon, Boeing wanted to sell things to one of those countries that I was responsible for, I had to sign off, okay, along with probably 50 other people that had to sign off. Well, anyhow, from time to time, we'd say, no, we don't want that technology to go to those countries, et cetera. Well, if you're in that business of trying to export military or technologies that had military and civil use, you had the Pentagon putting the brakes on your ability to export. If, however, you're in the business of not having a Pentagon to put the brake on you, let's say, for example, you make a technology with, and I'm giving you a specific case because the FBI got pretty involved with this, but if you drink a Coca-Cola, the secret ingredient for Coca-Cola isn't what's in necessarily what you think about with Atlanta. The other secret ingredient is the technology of the can and the metal. Mr. Staley's not here, is he? Some of you might know Mr. Staley. Yeah, I think he used to be head of R&D for Alcoa. He's a metallurgist. So anyhow, the can had a coating in it that kept the Coca-Cola perfect. And that was a very proprietary technology. So when Coca-Cola wanted to sell Cokes in China and bottled there, the company that was doing the technology for the preserving of the can had to agree to let this occur, let the Chinese bottle it and to use their technology. Well, it wasn't very long before that company essentially got all their technology got taken over by China, and then boom, now you have Chinese Cokes that are being exported all over, and there's not, or their sodas using that kind of technology. So a lot of cases Lighthizer was seeing where American companies were being coerced to giving technology, what we call technology transfer, other types of intellectual rights, property rights to China's government. And so anyhow, Lighthizer talked to Trump in 2015 about, hey, we need to go after these things that the Chinese are stealing from us through our trade policies. And that is something that then President Trump just kind of was attracted to, and he appointed Lighthizer as a U.S. trade representative. So Lighthizer is the one that really gets the credit. Trump took the blame, or took the heat, but Lighthizer did, the yeoman's work. And Lighthizer today is in that transition, and who knows what job he's going to get. He might become Treasury Secretary. Apparently, he's not going to be the Commerce Secretary, but he's probably going to be the trade czar. So long story, China, we slowed down what we're importing from China, and we beefed up what we're importing from Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam. So that's what we did to kind of protect the American market. But what did China do? China, export-driven country, said we have to find new markets. And when they said we're going to find new markets, the first, if you want to call it, the first attempt the first effort was driven, the first wave was driven because of the Trump tariffs. The second wave was driven by the Ukraine 2022 invasion of Ukraine. And China saw what Europe and the US did to put sanctions onto Russia. And China says, all right, we can't, if we ever do anything in South China Sea or Taiwan, et cetera, we can't have that happen to us. We have to insulate ourselves from this Western sanctions regime. So China just went, full bore to find new markets. 2018, and then it accelerated in 2020. And they used this thing called the Belt and Road Initiative. Maybe you've heard of that. I call it, you probably call it something similar to the Marshall Plan, but with more self-serving purposes. So essentially, hey, we're going to come into your country and we're going to help you improve your railways, improve your ports, improve your airports, improve your roads. And in exchange, you're going to let us use our engineers, our technology, et cetera. We'll loan you the money to do it with. We'll buy commodities, think iron ore, copper, whatever, from your country to do that. So the country said, great, where do I sign? And they go and they take these deals. Well, sometimes the deals go sour. And they go sour when the country is not able to make the loan payments, which is what happened with Sri Lanka. It was happening in Greece. It's happening in some other parts of South America and Africa. So the chart that I'm showing you here is on the left. So my wife and I went down to we just came back about a week and a half ago. We spent 2 weeks down in Argentina and Chile. And it's so interesting because I had previously known these countries to be American trading partners. We were the big guys. This was our backyard. But the latest map shows no, China has outpaced us in our own backyard for what these countries are importing. So my wife and I were in Santiago. We were tired of walking around. I don't know if anyone's been to Santiago. It's a huge city. It's like 9 million people. And we said, we need a break. Let's go visit some wineries. We hire a guide. The guide picks us up and he's driving us around in a Nissan. And I say to the guide, I said, this is a nice car. What does a car like that cost here in Santiago? And he says, oh, about $24,000. I mean, that's not bad. This is a pretty nice Nissan. And I said, oh, this is great. That's cheap. And he said, oh, no. We're going down the road and there's billboards for all these Chinese products, Chinese cell phones, Chinese cars, all kinds of Chinese stuff. And he said, everybody now is buying one of those, a Chinese car, $8,000. $8,000 for a Chinese electric vehicle. And that's what's happening, is they're taking market share away. So I don't have a map of Africa, but the European Union was your largest seller of automobiles into Africa, primarily Volkswagen, and the French. Well, now, again, don't have a map, I keep pointing to that. But now China has overtaken. They're now your primary seller of automobiles, solar panels. They've got 10 areas. In 2015, I know you read it. It was an important document, and you are very smart. 2015, China published this policy, this industrial policy report called Made in China 2025. You've heard of it, right? Well, actually, 2 years later, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce said, hey, what is this Made in China 2025 report? No one's heard of this thing. Turns out it's the most important document probably that's affected U.S. trade policy. And it was out for 2 years before the administration really kind of knew about it and before Congress started paying attention. But it was essentially saying, here is China's plan. We want to dominate global production of 10 different areas. So renewable energy, solar panels, wind turbines, vehicles. We can get into a lot of this stuff. They also said we want to dominate on semiconductors. We want to dominate on artificial intelligence. 2015 is when that was written. Now, they've been successful in some of those areas. They have not been as successful on semiconductors. So that 2015 plan has been why these countries have been changing, okay? China's trying to dominate those areas. All right, next slide. CCP, Chinese Communist Party, what are their priorities? First is they want to use the average Chinese person's bank savings to actually fund the production of their manufacturing sector. So Chinese people that said, all right, what do I do with my savings? I can put it in the bank, I can put it in the stock market, I can put it into housing. What do I do with that? I can put it in my mattress, right? Well, when it goes in the bank, the banks, many of these are, state supported or state affiliated banks, the banks would be encouraged to loan that out to support the local initiatives for factories, et cetera. What China was doing is that, all right, we're going to use that to actually fund the factories to do production, export, export. And that the rest of the world is going to buy China's stuff that's so cheap and will become the factory of the world for at least those 10 areas. So China didn't have to get their consumers to be the people that drove the growth, instead the exports. And if you can going back to the example of the $8,000 car, if you can get Chilean or Argentinian or Mexican consumers to buy your product for $8,000 instead of buying, Ford, you probably heard Ford closed their factory in Brazil. They couldn't compete. You probably, if any of you own Volkswagen stock or Mercedes-Benz, you probably know that those companies have had declining sales, their revenues have been missed, and it's because they're being outcompeted by the Chinese. So the US and China have been trying to respond to this by raising trade barriers, right? The EU has been slower than the US. That's the neat thing about our system, is we're able to respond faster. The other countries that, again, going back to liberal democracies, the other liberal democracies that have been major exporters, Japan, ROK, et cetera, they're also getting squeezed by this dumping by China. And who's the recipient? The global South, okay? Africa and South America in particular, they're just being flooded. But because they have less leverage, they're also less able to say no to a lot of what China's doing. And because they've taken these gifts, I'm trying to think, what's the metaphor when I give you a gift, but it's really got a, you know what I'm trying to say. It's a gift, but it's really not a gift. A wolf in sheep's clothing or something. So the last point I'm making there is this local governments that in the past, the way that they were making their money to support the factories, to support the infrastructure, et cetera, they were making their money by selling property, selling all these apartments, getting tax revenues, et cetera. But the real estate bust that's been going on for the past few years in China, where you've got 90 million empty apartment buildings, many of those are not finished, so therefore you can't move into them, you can't use them, and you can't sell them, right? Well, they're not making their money off of the sales anymore. So these local governments are getting squeezed. They're no longer getting the money from the property sales. And where are they going to get money from? They're going deeper and deeper in debt. So if you heard the news 2 weeks ago, maybe a week and a half ago, Chinese government said, hey, we're going to do this $1.4 trillion stimulus. Not really. That stimulus was mostly aimed towards helping these local governments kind of absorb some of their debt, okay? It wasn't stimulus like Americans got after COVID when people got $1,400 government checks to go out and buy furniture on Wayfair or something, right? Okay, now I want to talk to you about people. Demographic issues in China. You've all heard about the aging of the world, right? China's aging is so severe. These numbers, I can't even imagine if something like this were to happen in the US, where you look at a country of 1.4 million people shrinking by 600 to 900 million people by the end of this century. So, I mean, we're what, 335 million Americans? If we were to shrink down to 150 to 175 million Americans, imagine what we would be. I mean, we'd be panicking, right? Because we're going to wonder who's going to pay into Social Security? Who's going to pay into Medicare? Who's going to pay in to pay for the defense, to pay for all this other things that we're doing, to pay for the infrastructure? So this demographic problem is a time bomb. The other thing is, as that, let me think. Anybody ever read The Little Prince by Antoine Saint-Exupéry? Remember when you are in Japan, they have the museum for it. Did you see it? No? Okay. Well, anyhow, in the beginning of it, there's this picture, and the picture shows a snake, and there's inside, anybody remember what I'm talking about from the book? And there's something in there, and so adults look at it as one way, but the kids look at it and say, oh, that's a snake eating an elephant. That's what it is, right? So in this case, you have this demographic problem where this very, very, very large generation is moving its way through the system without something smaller coming, or excuse me, without something behind it to support it. And what's behind it is something very, very small. And it's just unsustainable. So more specifically, when you look at ratios, 5 workers for every 65-year-old that's out there, you have 5 workers who are paying into the system, okay? Paying into the tax system, paying into the productivity of the country, paying into the caregiving that goes with that, right? Then, of course, that's going to drop in the next 25 years down to about 2 people. And then after that, it'll be even, a 1-to-1. Not sustainable. China might say, hey, well, we're just going to raise the retirement age and make people keep working and working and working, right? Well, that's not going to really happen, because the people are going to say, hey, don't raise the retirement age. I was planning to retire at 60, 65 or whatever. So what is likely to happen when China kind of runs out of workers or doesn't have enough workers is China's going to start losing contracts in their factories, because the cost of labor is going to be much higher, and those contracts are going to go somewhere else. They're going to go to India, or wherever it is they're going to go. So that's just going to accelerate this demographic problem. Okay. So I mentioned before about the inflation, right around 0.3%. And again, because the investment has dwindled, what do we do with the money? Do we put it into the bank? Do we put it into, real estate? Well, they're all spooked, because they lost on average $60,000 in that property bust. It's very similar to the 2006-2007 period. If you saw the movie The Big Short, where the cocktail or the pole dancer had 5 houses, no, what do we call that? No documents, no doc loans. China was having these people buy these properties, and then not enough, to actually finish the properties. They couldn't sell them, and you end up with a large surplus. Okay. And I've already told you that part. The other thing that's happening, this kind of goes back to when you have a command-directed or central-directed economic policy, and the hierarchy in China is these local governments that have leaders, party leaders. They're all trying to move up the hierarchy to one day they can get to Beijing and they can be in the Politburo or in some higher level. Well, the way that you move up is to get in good graces. The way you get in good graces is to make sure your factory is fully producing. So you're going to do whatever it takes to make sure it's fully producing. That means the loans, et cetera, and you really don't care about the economics of it. Okay. This last one, when people are competing, or these Chinese managers and mayors are competing to actually move up in the hierarchy, what you end up having is this ever increasing, production that's competing for an ever shrinking global market, right? Global market is becoming tougher because of countries are blocking things through tariffs, or they're closing their borders, which means your margins are going to get smaller. And that's going to put pressure to lower the wages that so it's just a domino effect. And of course, if you got less money in your pocket, you're going to do less shopping, right? And that's why deflation is public enemy number one. What little money you got, you don't want to go spend it today if it's going to be cheaper to buy that thing next week. All right. Yeah, okay. All right. Am I keeping y'all past your bedtime? Okay. Now, just for full disclosure, my day job is I'm a financial planner. I've got a practice in Edgar Jones in Durham. So I deal with charts a lot. And I figured, hey, why not geek out a little bit and show you one of my charts, right? So this chart put together by JP Morgan, I'm going to show you over here on the right, this bottom right, where it says consumer income and wealth effects. So this is people's confidence and their willingness, to where are they going to get income. A-share equity, that means stocks, mutual fund stocks. So you're seeing is they lost by it declining the A-share equity. Again, my pointer's not doing too well. By this going down, it means they're losing confidence in making income in the stock market. Over here, they're losing confidence in their ability to get income through rentals or any other type of mean, and they're slowly losing confidence in their ability to make money off of buying and selling properties. Yeah. Yeah, all right, let's skip the rest. So afraid of the stock market. What little cash they've got is they're stashing it in the banks, but they also don't like what the banks are doing with it, because the banks are putting it into the local businesses, and those turned out to be just chasing bad loans. So they're cutting back on shopping, which means you have less people out there working. Very high youth unemployment. I'm going to show you a short YouTube video.
What exciting benefits do you get as a Hertz Gold Plus Rewards member?
You get to skip the line and go right to your car.
Welcome to Maryland, home to some of the brightest minds in the U.S., next door to our nation's capital, and an amazing place.
How did this movement in China go from young students in graduation gowns to people living in tents on city pavements? It's called tongping, or lying flat in English.
Lots of young people in China at the time when the job market was hit hard by the nation's economic slowdown, some started thinking, why not just lie flat?
If you want to join in, the rules are simple. Do not pursue a career, buy a house, get married, have children, or spend more than you need to survive. Of course, not everyone has been so extreme. Yet all online rumblings about tongping were removed from Chinese social media before a new name for the movement popped up.
The Chinese phrase for let it rot is 摆烂. It suggests a mentality of young Chinese that they can't really control anything, including their life and future, so why not just give up?
So, why are young people in China letting it rot?
So, it started from an online post back in 2021, in which a man in his mid-20s.
Okay. You're welcome to Google lying flat movement in China and watch the whole thing. It's like 10 minutes. But I wanted to tell you that was in 2021, 2022. The Chinese government shut it down by essentially closing off social media very, very quickly. As soon as one person would post something, they'd get it shut down. Let me go back to my slides. So yeah, the Chinese government tried to shut that down very quickly. The other thing that happened is, nonetheless, the Chinese government can't shut everything down. So the public angst, what we've been seeing, is rising. So this big data China is a research project carried out Stanford, I think it's Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, it's like 3 or 4 researchers from those universities. I saw a video of these guys. By the way, any of you professors? Okay, so these professors are real geeks, okay? They're just studying data like you wouldn't believe. I think they know what they're talking about. So they've been asking the same questions in China since 2004. And what's interesting to me is in 2004, when China's system was kind of overseeing this rise, China was feeling good about its future, okay? And so the unfair economic system was kind of like the last reason that people felt for not, getting ahead. The real reason in 2004, the reason if a person's not getting ahead is because they just don't have the ability, right? But now, as you fast forward to the research they did last year, is they're saying, hey, the system's broke. We don't have equal opportunity. It's not because of our lack of ability or lack of effort. It's because the system. Come on, next slide. Yeah. So the Chinese Communist Party isn't trying to make life significantly better for them because they're focused on that export-driven, type of an industrial policy. If this was America, we would be out there saying, all right, we need to be addressing these social issues, and we need to be the Federal Reserve is going to be doing something to stoke the economy to get these young people working, to get the unemployment rate down, to get the level of despair down. Because of our political system, the election a couple of weeks ago was probably won or lost because of the economic conditions and how people felt about them. Obviously, in China, that's not as important to them, right? Because they don't have elections. Yeah. But nonetheless, people still feel that there's a social contract between the people who run the system and the people who are part of the system. Some healthcare, some housing, some pension, some food, and of course, the community. But for that social contract to work, you really need to have improving in standards, improving, in income, as well as the risk day to day need to fall. Okay, otherwise people are going to get angrier and angrier. So, so that's how we get to the lie down movement. I got my phone here because I want to tell you, how many of you watched or were at the Duke versus Wofford game a few days ago, where 14 minutes were left in the second half, Duke 64, Wofford 17. Were you there? You went to Wofford. Okay. Yeah, so do you think Wofford had any chance of beating Duke? But they still had 14 minutes left in the game. So in sports, when you're so lopsided like this, and there's no way you're going to be able to come out ahead, it's called garbage time. Okay, you've heard of that? Some of you have heard of garbage time. That's the movement. So before in 2022, the movement was called the lying flat movement, if you want to Google it. But in 2024, the movement is called garbage time. And again, China tried to shut it down very quickly In less than a day, it had over 1 million views. So that gets into this misery index. Somebody else came up with, hey, let's compare how miserable is the situation. How miserable are you in China? So they said, well, if you're unemployed, you get 1 star. If you have a mortgage, you get 2. If you got debt, you get 3. If you're raising kids, 4. If you're trying to make money in the stock market, you get 5 stars in the misery. If you're sick, you get another. If you're housing, if you own housing that's not finished yet, you get another star. And if you've got this really bad liquor, then you get the 8 star. Okay. So anyhow, 74,000 views, I think, was in the first hour. This is just this past summer. What's the Chinese Party doing? Chinese Communist Party doing? They're doubling down. They're doubling down on, we're going to use the economic stimulus to support not the people, but to support the companies. And we're going to try to outcompete the world using our Made in China 2025 plan. And we think it's going to lead, ultimately, once we can knock our competitors out of business, in other words, make them go bankrupt, once we knock them out of business, then we'll be able to lead to more job growth in China. And then we can continue to work on our plans. This gets a little bit into the South China Sea. One of their plans, that's a whole nother session about the South China Sea, but one of those plans is to recognize the South China Sea as being Chinese territory, not Philippines, not any of the other countries, Vietnam, et cetera, that's there. So using this time while the United States isn't yet ready to defend our treaty obligations that we have to the Philippines or we have to Australia. So I know you're thinking, all right, so if that's what's happening in China, what's the US doing about it? Well, you're going to hear things from President-elect Trump about tariffs, et cetera. But one of the things the US military is doing, since I'll speak to our community, so my last assignment in the Air Force, I was the commander of the Air Force's largest logistics squadron. It's based in Okinawa. And I knew that the tyranny, what we call the tyranny of distance, how long, if the United States has to support our allies, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Australia, if we had to support them, how are we going to be able to get enough weapons, to get enough spare parts, to get enough everything to us? It's going to take time to cross the Pacific. So logistics is our weak point. More than anything, it's our weak point in the Pacific. So what's been happening is my old boss at that time, he's now a 4-star general. He's the commander, or he was the commander of the US Pacific Air Forces. About 2 years ago, they went around to all these World War II airfields on islands and said, all right, let's start figuring out which one of these do we want to start reopening. And so that's what's been happening, is the US is going out to some of these airfields with machetes and stuff and clearing the vines, putting down new asphalt or concrete, and essentially working to reopen bases that we haven't used since the 1940s. Okay, that's happening right now. This same general is now, he left the Pacific, he's now in Virginia. He's the commander of the U.S. Air Combat Command, which is the command that has most of our combat capability in the Air Force. And I just want to show you something. Before I do that. So he says, what my job every day is kind of like the commander of the biggest American air power, is to give President Xi Jinping a conundrum every day. All right. He says, I want to give him a dilemma so that when he wakes up, he looks at all the intel about what the Americans have got, forces, et cetera, so that they say, do I go into Taiwan today? I don't know. They got those forces there. Not today. Maybe not today. Maybe tomorrow, but not today. So that's what his name is Ken Wilsbach. General Wilsbach is trying to do every day is to make it so onerous and make the deterrent so strong that China would not want to actually take military action. So one of the ways that we do that is the US military does strategic communications. We tell the world about something that we're working on or something that we got. And you might be thinking, shouldn't you keep that secret? You would think we would keep that secret. But the risk is if we don't keep it secret, then they're going to think we don't have it. Therefore, they're going to go ahead and do it. So instead, what we do is we release things so that we can scare them a little bit. So you're going to watch a short little video.
Why does every outdoor brand think I want to look like this? I know I don't. Gear today is getting out of control, especially the pants. They're putting seams and zippers all over the place.
The U.S. Air Force recently released a stunning video of the B-21 Raider. You can see the U.S. Air Force's advanced sixth-generation aircraft taking off and landing. Not only that, testing continues for the B-21 Raider, and an important milestone has been achieved. During a panel at the Air and Space Force Association's Air, Space, and Cyber Conference, leaders from the Department of the Air Force and industry partners provided updates on the B-21 Raider. According to Thomas Jones, the president of Northrop Grumman Aeronautics Systems Sector, the B-21 program is making significant strides. They are now able to generate 2 flight test flights in a single week, which is quite impressive. The team has worked hard to design the aircraft to be a daily flyer, and their dedication is
So every few weeks, we're releasing something like we released this one. We released a video. Oops, sorry, wrong one. A video of a missile that bends. You're thinking, a missile that bends? Yeah. So you know how a hawk flies? The hawk turns its head, and when the hawk turns its head and looks down at the mouse or whatever, the whole body follows. So the engineer said, all right, if we can get a missile where it can turn its head rather than use the fins in the back, the missile can be a much, much more agile. Therefore, it'd be much harder to shoot it down. So that's something that we released recently. We're releasing things about drones, et cetera. And you're seeing more and more stuff where the U.S. is playing this strategic communications game with China of showing them our kinds of technology just to kind of keep them from moving forward on some of their more aggressive tactics. Okay. So what's their way ahead? As I said before, they want to dominate global production. Where do they get the materials that goes into that? So that's why they're going after South America and Africa, because that's the commodities that are coming out of those countries. The South China Sea, which would represent about 20 to 30% of the hydrocarbons that the Chinese economy needs. So if they can keep that, for themselves, but they want to be self-sufficient. That's their number one, self-sufficient, and thus not subject to the effects of sanctions. Steal away, the trade, essentially tell Volkswagen, you can sell in Europe if you want, or you can go bankrupt, but the rest of the market that you've been selling to is now ours. They're also trying to position the Chinese Communist Party as the governance system of choice and best able to support the Han Chinese people. They want to keep pushing us, keep pushing the U.S. further away from where they need to operate. They're not necessarily trying to come into conflict with us. This is my belief. They're not trying to come into direct military conflict. But if we try to stop them, then that would lead to conflict, right? And because of China's just huge size, they essentially think that they can push other countries to back down. Interesting story this week in the news about China's Coast Guard. Some of you may have seen this story. The Chinese Coast Guard cutters are the longest ones in the world. Why would you need to have a Coast Guard ship so big if you're just trying to look for drug smugglers and bad fishermen, right? No, it's really so you can dominate, so you can ram, you can dominate and push the Philippines, Vietnamese, Japanese, etc. Okay. So literally, they are the bull in the china shop. Okay. All right. So my pitch is essentially the fact that China is on a, they've got, you could call it a ticking time bomb. You could say they're on borrowed time, but they're doubling down on their strategy because they think they have a limited window to actually make it work. But if they wait too long, then the demographics are going to catch up to it, and the rest of the world's probably going to figure out how do they respond to it. So there's this limited window. And the term I would use is we're entering this period of maximum danger, okay, that we haven't had in probably 50, 60, 70 years. Maximum danger. We've just selected a new commander-in-chief who appears ready to go head-to-head with that bull in the china shop. End of story. You decide what happens next. Okay. Questions, comments?